I think it's time. We did so many new releases. I think it's time to go back and do some classical reviews. And great time, especially in the fall, to talk about The Deer Hunter.
Yeah, I know. There's actually more deer hunting than I expected in this film, and also maybe less.
So we're going to talk about a film that this is Kyle's first time viewing, as well as if I did a film class, it would be required viewing in my film class. So let's talk about The Deer Hunter.
Hey, welcome back to the show, everybody. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Goethe from GoatFilmReviews.com.
Hey everybody, I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast. Thanks for finding us, thanks for watching, and for our loyal fans, sincerely, thank you for continuing to support the show. Another way you can support the show, join the Patreon. Have some great deals, great content, and opportunities to tell us what movies we can review for future episodes, with of course a shout out to you as well. Kyle and I are members on Minnesota Film Critics Alliance. Check out the webpage for critics reviews as well as ours. And today we're talking about a classic that I'm grossly offended that Kyle has a copy of. I don't. It's one of my favorite movies. He has a copy and he's never seen it.
I broke it just to spite you.
No. Yes. So it's a great opportunity to talk about The Deer Hunter.
All right, three best friends from a small Pennsylvanian steel mill town have their lives impacted by the Vietnam War, specifically their time as prisoners of war.
This is a winner of 5 Oscars, nominated for 9. It won Best Director, Best Supporting Actor Walken, Best Sound, Best Film Editing, and missed out on cinematography. Well, of course, Viggo Zimmerman, who did like Godfather, right? Wonderful cinematographer. How did he miss out on not getting Best Cinematographer? Well, go back and look at Days of Heaven, Terrence Malick's Days of Heaven. I don't know if you have a copy of that, but the overall, it is, yes, that cinematography for Days of Heaven supersedes this one, even though the cinematography for this is gorgeous.
It's one of those cases where, you know, in one hand out the other.
Yeah.
And I think there's always going to be, you know, as much as I adore the Oscars and I respect everything that's being done there, you know that there's a certain instinct of like, well, I'm voting for Deer Hunter for Best Picture, and I really like Days of Heaven, so I want to make sure it gets
There's a look of
something.
Days of Heaven, yeah.
You know, I want to make sure it gets something. That's not to denigrate either film, but there's 5 good-looking movies on the roster every year. You got to pick one.
So, why do I like The Deer Hunter so much? Well, I kind of grew up in this kind of neighborhood of blue-collar labor workers. I grew up in South St. Paul. So, I kind of know these kind of guys who work hard, play hard. I also enjoy this kind of this movie realism that at the beginning of the movie, they never go to sleep.
No.
As soon as they get to work, you go to work, party, have a wedding, go deer hunting. That's it. Never go to bed.
Yeah, I mean, hell, at my own wedding, my groomsman texted me the next morning and say, your friend hasn't let us go to bed yet. And I said, well, what have you guys been doing all night? He's been defending Return of the Jedi. But yeah, I know exactly what you mean, because like these are people that if you grew up in a small town, you know these kind of archetypes. I feel like I went to school with John Cazale. But
I feel like,
you know
all these people, right?
Yeah.
And Michael's kind of the self-ordained leader, even though it doesn't feel like it. But they all look up to Michael. Michael's kind of they look out for him, almost like, hey, too much beer, and they like respond to him. He's kind of like this Superman of the Justice League.
But at the same time, you can see Michael has a lot of kind of intense personal demons.
Yes.
In some ways. I mean, when they especially that indicative of that scene when they go
Not to
deer
mention he's in
hunting
love with
early on
his
in the
friend's
film.
wife.
Yeah, which is that's a problem if you're living with one of them, with the guy too, to have that constant like reminder of someone you care about who's not with you. He's carrying a lot of weight with himself. It's interesting to think that this movie would have been a drastically different film if Roy Scheider had stayed in the production.
Yeah, we always forget
he
about
left
that.
2 weeks before production began, and it's kind of funny because Robert De Niro fits right in with a lot of these people because, I mean, hell, he was in The Godfather Part 2 with John Cazale, with John Savage. They were both in that film with him, and a lot of people from that kind of production went to this 3-hour movie after they worked on that 3-hour movie.
Don't just appease me. What do you think of this movie after seeing, we've already reviewed something similar to this, like Out of the Furnace. And now you've seen this movie. What is your kind of take of the kind of, because we critiqued that movie as well, kind of similarities to it?
In terms of the town itself, I guess you could say so. In terms of the environment in which the people are in, at the same time, it's 2 distinctly different time periods that we're dealing with here. Yeah. And I think that this film is definitely, the vibe that it's going for is one that's a bit less realistic in terms of what it's trying to
No, it's very
depict.
heavily styled.
Yeah.
Not a lot on plot, heavily styled. I know.
This might be the longest near plotless film, just because it's not really about the plot.
Right, and what I appreciate, it's the storytelling, his favorite catchphrase, not the story you tell, but you have this bombastic entry to every act in the movie. The beginning of the movie is this truck, just almost fire coming out of its exhaust, blaring into the street, gives you this boisterous introduction to the town. Not to mention, you understand, Act 2 is the helicopters. It is boisterous Act 2. And then
you don't realize that those things are happening and then you're like, oh, we're here.
Yeah, so you can clearly see where the Act 2, Act 3, and all these acts start and end. Because there's this boisterous introduction. There's a hard cuts. And I understand why people appreciate the edit. There's some hard cuts like, we're done. Boom, here we are.
Yeah, but it caught me off guard when he returns home. I didn't realize that portion of the film was done. It's funny because I had read somewhere that it was planned to have 21-minute long wedding scene that actually lasts 51 minutes.
Yeah,
and they actually don't get to Vietnam until an hour in the movie, which I find very fascinating because the movie itself, it's told that it's a Vietnam film. It's not.
No,
it's not really.
Vietnam is a vessel to explain the story.
Yeah, and what I found truly fascinating was actually that it's based on an unproduced play that's called The Man Who Came to Play, which was about Russian roulette in Vegas. And so this was just a completely different. It's kind of reminding me of Apocalypse Now in some ways, where it was about Russian roulette, but it was given to these guys, to Michael Cimino and Derek Washburn were given the opportunity to adapt this, and they decided to place it within the confines of Vietnam. So Vietnam is more of a placeholder for what these people are experiencing, kind of like Apocalypse Now.
Right. I would like to go back. I have taken one acting class in my life. I don't know how those actors do it. I do a film. One of the best acting performances you will see is when Michael comes back and Meryl Streep. And they just have that it's a very soft scene of them when he comes back from Vietnam. Remember, he misses the party. He just can't handle the transition. And then they have this dialogue, which all the subtleties, they know that they're both in love with each other, but they won't admit it. And how is everybody doing? It's probably the best two on-person acting you will see ever.
Yeah, and I think it's because they both are in a situation where they don't know the situation with Christopher Walken's character Nick. Like they don't that's the thing that will decide where their relationship goes or lack thereof.
Right,
is the location of this friend who is still out in the shit.
And just talk about a little bit about the scene. You watch Meryl Streep; she's trying to not keep her eyes on him, as so like to give hints like, "Oh, I really do like you." Not to mention, when he comes, he's looking for the exits. Kind of like he's still in Vietnam. Like, where can I duck out in any situation? So he doesn't want to be confined to space. He's always going for the door, and she's trying to hold him in. Wonderful acting. Wonderful acting throughout the whole movie.
Yeah. It's a movie of major performances. You know, John Cazale, who was only in 5 features. And they're all
his last
bangers.
movie. He was actually dating Meryl Streep at the time. You can see at the third act, he had cancer. He wasn't telling anybody. People respect him for that. But you can see that he's slowly eating him.
Well, yeah, and he was actually unable to be insuranced to be in the film, and so De Niro himself paid for the insurance to have him on set. And I think it was interesting that the director didn't want to have him replaced, but the studio did, and Meryl Streep threatened to walk. And Meryl Streep was not, like, she had been in movies, but she was not Meryl Streep when she was in production on this film. Yeah. So to risk everything on that is a really kind of powerful thing. And, you know, John Savage is a guy that's not in a ton of movies, but he is quite good when I see him in movies, you know? Yeah. Meryl Streep, Christopher Walken, Robert De Niro. It's a solid cast across the board.
And I love the cinematography in this. I understand why I got beaten up by Days of Heaven, but them going to hunting, I love the look of it. It's so saturated, the deers and everything. The Vietnam scenes are fantastic. Everything's shot so well. And then, of course, they did the homage on Shaun of the Dead, the look of wearing the red bandages and wearing white for Russian roulette. It's kind of this very much style and poetry emotion. You know, he talks about the trees. It seems a little silly at times.
Yeah.
But it fits for the story of him come back to here. And I think the single theme of this movie, I try to, there's one thing, I think it's transitions and how people can't really adapt to transitions. War interrupts life, but to see them all, when they all finally come back, they're not the jovial people before the war. They're not immature. It's almost like it took Nick's death to make him finally mature.
Yeah. Well, in plot terms, it's very similar to, I think it's Coming Home.
Yeah, it came out at the same time.
Yeah, Bruce Dern. Bruce Dern. I was like Laura Dern's father.
Bruce Dern actually won, I think.
Yeah, so, you know, they're very similar to that, but this is definitely more of, I think, kind of a dream narrative in some places. It is kind of
It's very fever dreamish, yeah.
For me, this all boils down to, because knowing this about the play it was based on, this Russian roulette as a like symbol of the entire film.
Yeah.
Being about purpose. Like, what is the meaning of us being in this Vietnam, in this war right here?
Yeah,
What
you
is
feel
the
like before the
purpose?
war, they're all kind of rudderless. Maybe we're joining. It feels like on the Western Front, we're going to join the war. Yay, have fun. And
because they think it will give them that purpose.
Yeah.
You know, and the Russian roulette itself this is people competing in a dangerous game where there are no winners. There's just people that don't lose this time.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's what really matters for this film is that every time they play, if you survive this play, you won't survive future play because you will go back again. And that's kind of what Christopher Walken's character gets embroiled in is I'm going to keep doing this because I just have nothing left to do.
Yeah.
You know, I don't
What
have
am I going to do when I go back?
This is my purpose is to get money put together because I can't go back home because then I'll have no purpose again.
Right.
And I think De Niro's character finds that when he comes home, he doesn't really have a purpose anymore.
Right. I think it's all of them. Everybody, including the females in the female characters in the movie, understand you really can't go back home once you left.
Yeah.
No matter if it's war or transition, you really can't go back home.
Yeah, and the sad thing is he's gained nothing in that pursuit.
Yeah.
He's gone. He's
Michael?
come back. Michael's character
Yeah.
has gained absolutely nothing. He has not become he has not like made himself into a person that he likes more. No. He has not made himself more purposeful.
We talked about like evolutionary of character, and that's a tough evolution of character because there's no advancement, but he's changed person.
He's changed. Yes, that's a great point. Yeah, because he has changed, but he is no better in his life. He has no advancement in his life from this. Everyone says, "Hey, great job over there." But does he have a lot of luck advancing in a career? No. Does he have any luck advancing in his relationship? Kind of, but not really, because there's still that sticky point about his friend that may not come home.
We have also this mythology that we have incorporated in American consensus of the single soldier going back to Vietnam to kind of make some kind of correction, kind of salver, rather than the severed ending that it had.
Yeah.
That we have somebody, we see it with like the Chuck Norris movie, Rambo and everything, and coming home. Stayed. They're coming back, but that's one of the Vietnam movies where the person came home and stayed, and that was the structure for the movie. Overall, what's your assessment? This is the first time viewing, so I think people are kind of interested in what you have to say.
It's a fantastic film. I mean, and it has those comparisons to things like Full Metal Jacket, to things like Apocalypse Now, Platoon, Casualties of War. It's got all those comparisons that are. I'm always going to be an Apocalypse Now boy in terms of like that is my my
very much like
of
the
Vietnam
Odyssey,
War.
isn't it?
Yeah. And of course, me being the kind of fantastical storytelling fan, I love that kind of a storytelling device. Yeah. But this would probably be my second favorite film set roughly about the Vietnam War. Even though like I said before, the Vietnam War is not really the point of the film. This is the second favorite film that is set during that time period in my mind. I really enjoyed the character evolution, what's going on at play there. I like the central metaphor of the Russian roulette and how it plays out everything that's going on in the film is about that scene, which is kind of funny because I walked into the film knowing exactly every one of those Russian roulette scenes because they're so iconic.
Right,
it doesn't take away from the film.
No.
What is interesting is that you pointed out, it's all these Vietnam films are about going back when you have to go back, and he does go back, but he doesn't go back with a vengeance. He goes back, maybe that is his purpose. Yeah. Is like he goes back with some purpose to bring his friend home, and I guess he does in some ways. What's interesting is that this film did have a pseudo sequel. In the sense, because in Italy you don't have to have copyright laws.
Oh, Italy, of course.
So
Italy.
Antonio Margheriti made a film called The Last Hunter because The Deer Hunter was released in Italy as The Hunter. And that film was done as The Last Hunter. And he was basically seen as like, I didn't like The Deer Hunter as much because it wasn't very fun. So here's my fun Vietnam movie. I have not seen it, but I can tell you right now that that's kind of the funny viewpoint is that this was one of the early films that really said, this is not a fun situation.
This is, before we end, I want to talk about, this is the second film by Michael Cimino. He did one prior to this with Jeff Bridges. I think it was
Thunderfoot and Light?
Yes.
Something.
Gosh.
Thunder and Light.
Yes. And then he did Heaven's Gate, which almost bankrupt Paramount.
I'm still sitting on my copy of Heaven's Gate whenever you have 4.5 hours to talk about it.
But it was charming. Started his career doing commercials, kind of like almost like Billy Freakin', and then did documentaries and then feature films. After Heaven's Gate was a big crash, he kind of went into seclusion, and very few people would see him, and passed away kind of just without anybody really knowing. There was kind of a blip in the paper, which is kind of a surprise. Michael Cimino's life is very interesting, very complex person to kind of investigate. But with this movie, you see that how enduring he can do with the movie. You check out Heaven's Gate. There's definitely a flawed film, but for filmmakers who will probably enjoy far more than what it's kicked out to be.
Yeah, and I've always been told to check out the really, really long version. Like, give yourself the afternoon for that one.
Yeah.
What's interesting about him as a director is that he definitely was a director who fought for his vision. I mean, he did fire the editor on the film, Peter Zinner, for trying to make cuts to the wedding scene to make the film move a little bit faster. He fired him, which is funny because Peter won an Oscar for best editing, and he said, so I don't think he holds it too much against me when we were both holding our Oscars and hugging at the ceremony. But he did fight for his vision in a lot of ways. He fought for his actors. Yeah. And it's unfortunate because when Heaven's Gate came out and it was a disaster, both financially and critically, people started looking back at this film and finding hidden ways to break it into pieces. There was a lot of discussion later on after this film came out about the viewing of the Vietnamese people in the film.
Yes,
and that kind of the breaking down of that.
Wanted to address that. Yeah.
The realistic sense of actually having Russian roulette. Chimino was able to say, like, well, I have proof that this took place there, but he wasn't able to actually like conjure up specifics about like the newspapers he read about.
Somebody found proof to disprove him. He never really shied from that.
Yeah. I don't think, inherently speaking, that the inclusion of Russian roulette in this film whether or not it actually happened there, which I don't think it did. I do think it is integral to the film, and I think this is a movie. This is a filmic language, and I don't think this movie is literally poking with your stick saying, "Isn't it crazy that this happened there?" It's not doing that.
No. I agree. It's an embellishment to draw to the story.
Yep, and it's something to develop the characters and work in there.
But we see all these embellishments of like Apocalypse Now, Coming Home, and this movie didn't really do justice to Vietnam. And of course, we can do even Missing in Action and all that stuff. Where you need the reason why we needed Platoon.
Exactly. I think it's a great point. I think Platoon is kind of the apology tour, if you will, of we didn't really get in the weeds about this situation.
Yes.
So I'm happy that film exists for that reason. I don't think this movie features the Vietnamese like characters a terribly large amount because it's not really about the time.
No, but it is criticize them for how they're portrayed in this movie, but then look at the Chuck Norris movie.
Oh yeah, that's completely off base. But then again, no one goes to Chuck Norris films looking for realness.
Right. You know. Yeah.
But that's where I think the dream narrative helps here, and knowing the footage ahead of time that this movie is not traditionally speaking like true to the Vietnam War experience. The Vietnam War is a backdrop for showing the change in these characters, their purpose, and the things that they're losing.
It is true to the story that is written, not true to the actions on Vietnam. Vietnam's kind of a mythical place. It's not of the reality of it.
Yeah, and I think if you go to a movie like The Deer Hunter and you're looking for 100% accuracy, you should be watching a documentary. You should be reading a nonfiction book because there is no possible way to get these things 100% correct. Something is going to suffer, and it's unfortunate when it happens to be the depiction of a people, but it's just you're not going to get everything right, and especially for a film of the time. We were still heavily reeling from the situation that we were in there. It's an unfortunate thing, but I don't think it mars a totally wonderful film.
It's a memorable film. It's an unforgettable film. And, of course, that's two things I say why it's a great film. And there's a lot of things. This is my third time sitting down and really watching it. This is the first time I've ever seen that when Michael intentionally misses his shot against the deer and he says, okay, all right. But then he calms enough and he goes, how do things are going? Okay. Yeah. It's a nice transition to it's not getting better, but it's not getting worse for me.
Well, and it's kind of his viewing that the gun he carries doesn't feel like sport as much for him anymore.
No.
You know, it doesn't feel like something that excites him in that same way because he's used it in the worst ways you can.
Yeah.
That moment, I think, is the defining moment of the film.
It is.
It's because it shows that he has actually, in some ways, on a personal level, moved backwards in that he can no longer enjoy the things that he enjoyed before.
It's not anti-hunting. It's him being authentic to himself.
Yeah,
I'm done with this.
It's him breaking under his own weight in some ways. So I think that's the moment for me where I actually I just got it now actually too. I just got goosebumps just
instead
thinking
of
about that
bumbling John Cazale and all his friends bumbling around and not wearing the boots and everything.
Yeah. My biggest flaw with the film, we didn't get more Cazale because I mean knowing that he was only in 5 films, and that great documentary, I think it's called You Know Him or something like that. There's a documentary about John Cazale that talks about the 5 films that he was in and how is it so crazy that this guy was in 5 of the greatest movies ever made, and unfortunately we just didn't get enough of him.
Yeah, he should.
And I think that's a really good documentary. So
if he was still around, his streak would have continued. That's how I think of.
I think he would have been in The Irishman with the other three of them. Right. We would have seen him in that epic 3.5-hour movie with them.
Yes. So please keep the conversation going. Hit the like and subscribe button and leave a comment down below. We'll love to talk to you about it.
Yeah, and we've covered, we've covered Casualties of War. This film, we've covered a few different films set during the Vietnam War and kind of involved in that story.
Yeah.
Which one would you like to see us cover on a future episode? I'd be interested because I'm always looking to revisit.
He likes threads. Yeah, he likes to keep the threads going.
You got to.
Yeah.
Anyway, you can find all of my film reviews over at goatfilmreviews.com. We just finished the 31 Days of Horror for this year, so go ahead and check out all those reviews.
How the hell did you do that?
I barely made it this time, man. It was a
rough
rough one.
Yeah.
But you'll also notice here, I think this episode is going to drop when it's time to vote still. So if you have a chance, if you're not early voting, please take some time on Tuesday, November 5th to go out and vote. Have your voice heard. We're not going to tell you which way you have to go, but just go out and speak your voice, because you have no right to complain about the world if you're not having a say in it. That's just my thoughts. All right.
Always exercise your rights.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.